John F. Kennedy once said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." By this, he meant that when one thing gets better, then usually other things get better that are related to it. I think this phrase applies especially well to couples, in that when one partner starts to improve, then the relationship tends to get better as well, because it demands, without even saying in words, that the other partner begins to make changes and begins to reflect differently and see themselves and the relationship differently as well. So we're going to talk about individual development today. We're going to talk about what to work on that actually improves the relationship itself, because a better me makes a better we. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair their ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the outset, a better me makes a better we. And one thing that happens that I see often in my couples is that when one partner begins to take the journey towards healing their trauma, what happens is the relationship tends to get better as well. Oftentimes, I'll have a partner call me and they want to do couples therapy, but maybe their partner won't come. And so part of what I say to them is, there's important work that you can do on yourself that actually will improve the relationship as well. And this happens for 4 reasons, I think. There's 4 reasons, I think, that working on yourself can improve your relationship. Reason number 1, if you're working on yourself, then that means you're less likely to be defensive or to move into your protection as often. You stay more open to your partner. You're more likely to regulate your emotions and get triggered less because, again, you're doing the important work on yourself. You're more open and vulnerable with your partner, which increases at least the chances for connection, if not increases connection in and of itself. Vulnerability equals connection. And then finally, number 4, which means the couple is less likely to get caught in their cycles. So you're repairing ruptures more often. You're not getting caught in those cycles as often. You're de-escalating them because you're being less defensive. You're regulating your emotions better, and more likely you are open and more vulnerable with your partner. So those are 4 things that I think happen. And again, it's not explicit. It's more implicit changes that start taking place in the relationship. It's really hard to be mad at somebody who's being open and vulnerable. It's really hard to move into your protection and your defenses when somebody else is staying calm. And so by the sheer fact that one partner's working on those things, it automatically forces the other partner to readjust themselves. It changes the system because one of the components in that system begins to change. As I said, sometimes I'll get calls from folks who want to start working on themselves first. And so I'll say, well, is this for, couples therapy? Or, well, no, I think it should just start with me. And I think there's good wisdom in that. I can understand that. I certainly have seen and have recommended to couples through the years that they're not ready for couples therapy because maybe they are both so quick to move into their protection because the cycle has just dominated the relationship for so long that I actually will say, you all aren't ready for couples therapy. You need to go do individual work. You need to begin to regulate yourselves. You need to begin to know your triggers. You need to begin to understand what it is you're protecting, those vulnerabilities. And then once you do that work, you can come together and you'll be more regulated in here as a couple in order to really begin to work on the relationship. So I think it's wise when somebody says they want to begin to work on themselves. Now, I've always asked the question, okay, what work are you doing? What's the work that really matters? Because I've seen a lot of times a couple that will come to me and they'll come for many sessions, and then one partner decides, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to work on myself, and then we'll come back. And what I hear from the partner when they reach out is, well, they said they're going to work on themselves, but I'm not seeing them do any work. I see them go to their jobs. I see them come home. I see them play with the kids. I'm not seeing any actual work taking place here. And so sometimes I think people say I need to do work on myself when maybe they mean a break, but I also think they don't really understand what is the work that I need to be doing if I'm going to improve myself, a better me, that will impact the relationship, a better we. So I think about this like playing an instrument. When you play an instrument, you've got to work on the right things in order to further your development. Just doing the same thing over and over doesn't always make you a better musician. So if you learn a piece of music and you play that piece of music over and over and over, you're not expanding your skills by playing the same piece. You need to learn a different piece. You need to learn a piece that's maybe a hair more challenging, or maybe focuses on a particular technique in that piece. Just putting in the time, doing the same thing over and over and over doesn't make you better at that instrument, and it doesn't make you a better partner. So it's really important to focus in on what are the things that need to be worked on in order to make a better me and ultimately a better we. Now, this also shows a lot of research in sports. Learning anything new shows that it takes time that matters, but rather doing the right things is how you get the biggest benefit. The whole 10,000 hour rule is fine, but research also shows that 10,000 hours of doing the same thing doesn't make you an expert. Maybe you have 10 years doing that, but if you're just repeating the same mistakes and you're not pushing yourselves into the uncomfortable boundaries of whether it's a sport or an instrument or whatever it is, or just learning you, then you're not really growing. So I kind of want to just launch from there, take that idea that it's really important. If you're going to work on yourselves, then let's focus in on what's really going to matter, what's going to make the difference. And so I've listed several things out here, and as we know, trauma impacts 3 areas of your life. Besides the basics such as avoidance, getting triggered, things like that, we know that complex trauma, relational trauma, especially in our youth, it tends to really impact 3 areas of your life. The first one is emotion regulation. The second one is a negative self-concept, negative sense of self. And the third one is it disturbs relationships, especially around the rupture repair process. So if you're going to work on yourself, start doing and focusing in on the real work that's going to make a difference. Let's start with emotion regulation. So what that means is that you really need to be able to understand your triggers. If your partner uses a tone when they are upset that sounds condescending, that sounds like it's a put down, or like you're a child, and you know this is a trigger for you, then what are you doing to combat that trigger when it happens? Are you just completely giving over to that emotion and flying off the handle and going into a rage? Or are you actually having a plan that when my partner does this, uses this tone of voice, I know this is a trigger for me. I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to say, time out. Please don't talk to me that way. That's a real trigger for me. Can you please use a different tone? Or can you say that differently to help me right now? What is it that you're going to have? A phrase to yourself, a phrase to your partner that's going to be able to help you combat that trigger when you know about it. Secondly, retraining your nervous system to stay in the window of tolerance. What tends to pop you out of the window of tolerance? If you'll recall from previous podcasts when I've talked about the window of tolerance, that's basically just a window where you can stay calm, cool, and collected. You use all parts of your brain simultaneously. You're not flooded or overwhelmed, which is what happens when you pop out of the window. And you can be hyper flooded, meaning you can be flooded and be hyper aroused. Anger is the most common. Or you can be hypo flooded, and that's when your body just kind of shuts down and freezes. So what are you doing to try to expand that window of tolerance and be able to stay more regulated more often? And that means, are you going to be practicing yoga, meditation? How are you learning to get in touch with your feelings? Because if you're not in touch with your feelings, if you can't feel them in your body, if you can't recognize them, if you can't put a name to it, if you can't reflect on them and hold a safe space for them without acting on it, then you're much more likely to be able to pop out of the window of tolerance. So all these things that I've mentioned many, many times before, practicing yoga, practicing meditation, taking walks in the woods, daily exercise, stressing your body in some physical exertion are all really important ways to begin to regulate your emotions better. So that's one thing I think you can do. Talking about a negative self-concept. What mental model is embedded in you from your trauma, from past wounds, that tends to come up and frame your interactions and causes an automatic interpretation of events? Maybe that mental model is, I'm unworthy of love. Maybe that mental model is, I'm never good enough. I'll never measure up. Maybe that mental model is, I can never get it right for my partner. And so I'm not saying that you never receive feedback, that message is never sent, but it's also being interpreted a certain way because we have these mental models that we use that are pretty deep down inside of us, and they're in our implicit memories, meaning that those memories are not verbal memories. They are encoded as interactions that we had that are nonverbal in us. And so oftentimes we can play out or do something in a way that we're not necessarily putting words to it. It's a learned behavior, but it was learned so often that it just becomes ingrained in us, a part of ourselves. You might want to say it's sort of automatic behavior. Think about driving to your work one day. This has happened to me before. I'm sure it's happened to you. You're in your head about what the day's going to be like. Maybe you've got several meetings or you've got customers you're meeting with or whatever that is. And all of a sudden you sort of arrive in the parking lot at your office or wherever you work. And you kind of go, oh, wow, I wasn't even paying attention. That's a little bit what it's like. It's this program that sort of runs inside of us without us even thinking about it. But it's really important to begin to know what those mental models are. Who's driving the bus when I'm not paying attention? Is it my wounded child? Is it my wounded adolescent? Is it a rebellious person that tried to push back in order to get attention because I was never getting enough attention? Is it a child that retreated, that wants to shrink from the world and not be seen because it felt so rejected? And so I tend to make myself small and diminish myself? What particular model tends to drive the bus for you when you're not thinking about it? There are ways, believe it or not, to discover this. And one is certainly with therapy, because a good therapist can help you connect the dots and understand sort of implicitly what's happening inside of you that might be driving that bus. Understanding the themes that play out in your relationship. Understanding, do I tend to push for connection? And when I do, that sends my partner reeling and floods them and actually pushes them away. Do I tend to withdraw myself? We've talked about this a lot in terms of attachment styles and in terms of cycles that can get created. So just understanding, are there themes that play out in my relationship? When I interpret my partner as being critical, that mental model that I'm not good enough comes up. I tend to shut down and withdraw, and then it leaves my partner feeling very alone because they don't know what's happened inside of me, and that oftentimes creates a cycle. That would be a really good understanding of your negative self-concept and how it plays out in the relationship. Understanding fear or shame that triggers your attachment style. Oftentimes when you're shutting down, when you feel not good enough, the root emotion of that is shame. And as I mentioned on another podcast, shame is all about the sense of self. Shame is about not I've done bad, but I am bad. And so recognizing whether that is shame that's coming up, that's driving the bus for you, or whether it is fear, two of the strongest and in some ways most destructive emotions that we have. Fear can rule our lives. When we're scared of something, we tend to avoid it. And so we tend to not take it on head first and tackle it and try to conquer it, whether that be a skill or whether that be talking to our partner, confronting our partner about something. Fear tends to really rule a lot in our lives and can be excessive fear when we've had past trauma. And so finally, the third category is the rupture and repair process that I've talked so much about. And that is understanding how to make better repairs, quicker repairs, understanding the cycles and being able to see them when you get caught in them with your partner, understanding your role in that cycle, and then most importantly, how can you communicate what's happening and how can you begin to communicate your feelings to your partner in order to de-escalate and break those cycles. Because once you begin to do that, then you have fewer cycles and they last less often. So where a cycle might last for 2 or 3 days where you're not talking to your partner and you guys are avoiding each other in separate rooms of the house, maybe very minimal communication around the kids or something like that. Instead, you tend to make quicker repairs. You tend to get back to a place of connection and have fewer ruptures. And you build up this sense of confidence in the relationship that, oh yeah, we can do hard things. And speaking of hard things, the things I've just laid out here is hard work. It's hard work because it takes time, energy, and focus. It's hard because you have blind spots and your brain is not always your friend. Our brain sometimes betrays us. It exaggerates our fears. It brings up things from the past that have happened to us that allow us to misinterpret our interactions with our partner. So we have to be able to think about how we think. And I'll try to justify why I feel the way I do and block your ability to stay open long enough to challenge your thoughts. So being able to think about how we think is what we call metacognition. And we have to be able to reflect, as I've just said, and stay open long enough to go, why do I think that way? Why did I interpret it that way? Where might have that come from? So this is the hard work of self-development. But this is the work that actually pays off in spades. It pays off huge benefits in the relationship when you do this kind of work. Focusing on emotion regulation, your negative mental models, and the rupture repair process is the work that pays off when wanting to resolve complex and relational trauma and wanting to be a better me, which makes a better we. Thank you so much for listening today. As always, keep giving me that great feedback. I really appreciate it. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.